All right, let's call to order the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Item 1.02, live streaming announcement. Meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. Moving on to our new business agenda, item 2.01, food service budget. Mr. Waldo?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Steiker. Mrs. Karen Marlin is with us this evening. She's our food service director. And I'll just share a moment here with the board that we're very lucky to have her running our food service department. We're one of the few districts in our IU that has an in-house operation, something we're very proud of, and an operation that is well run and efficiently run. And so we'll talk a little bit about the budget tonight. In front of you is a hard copy handout that has some assumptions and key call-outs that I'll draw your attention to. And then on pages 2 and 3 are details of revenue and expense for the fund. And so I'll begin by saying for a number of years now, maybe since the pandemic, the food service fund has maybe been one of the more challenging budgets for us because the federal government has been kind of doing some things and not doing some things around subsidies. The state government has been doing some things and not doing some things around subsidies. And then we have our own local sources. And so the budget really has some pretty significant variation in it. I think the way I like to look at 24-25 with Ms. Marlin and also Mrs. Ely is that 24-25 is probably reestablishing in many ways kind of the new normal, if you will. We have a better sense from the state about some of the subsidies we're receiving. We're kind of on the other side of the pandemic and all the stimulus money. And so we have a better sense of what's happening with the federal dollars. And then participation, we've settled into a nice rhythm in our buildings to know what's happening at a local level in terms of paid lunches from families. And so with that being said, I will just acknowledge the revenue is up significantly, about $700,000. On that second page, you can see there's 3 buckets, I'll say. There's the local sources at the top, there's state sources in the middle, and federal sources at the bottom. About $323,000 is from the state sources. The big increase there, that's budget to budget, is because of the uncertainty around the state funding of breakfasts. When we were in 23-24 and building this budget, there was uncertainty about whether or not the breakfast program would continue in its paid format. And it has, and it looks like it's got the staying power to stay the course. And a credit to our building principals, but also Mrs. Marlin and how that program has expanded in our buildings and the participation we're seeing around breakfast in all of our 8 buildings. And so that's gone really, really well. And then federal sources, I'll say, has increased as well, but really indicative of where the federal government's heading on the other side of the pandemic. In terms of expenditures, salaries are reflective of what the normal year-over-year increase is. And then the big increases really are 2 factors, what we're buying in food in terms of menu planning and menu design, but also the inflation. And I think from a practical standpoint, the easiest way I like to explain it is going to the grocery store has gotten significantly more expensive for all of us. And so in running our food service operation, we too have seen a corresponding large increase there. So in terms of the bottom line, we would like to ask the board to consider a 10-cent increase in meal prices. The 2 things about that, there's what's called the paid lunch equity. And without getting into great level of detail, that is a calculation that has to be performed on an annual basis. At times, the state has paid more attention to it in years and less attention to it in other years. But essentially, the paid lunch equity is looking for a check and balance between what you're charging paid meals and what is coming in state and federal sources. The final piece is with the 10-cent increase, it'll continue to support kind of the long-range planning where we think we're heading with the food service as we establish that new normal, but also understanding that even with the 10-cent increases, we do some benchmarking with other local districts. We're still at the low end of where other districts are, and that ranges from, you can see our prices at $3 for lunch. Some other schools around us, I think Mrs. Marlin, are $3.50. Is that fair to say?
At least.
So we're still feeling good about that from a benchmarking perspective, so.
Mr. Longwell, when you're talking about the 10-cent increase in the equity portion, is it a mandate that we must increase by 10 cents? Because we're starting off with a surplus in the budget.
Mm-hmm.
So if we chose not to increase by 10 cents, is there I get that there's a $23,000 impact to the budget, but we're still ahead, right?
Yeah, the paid lunch equity, I'm trying to think how best to articulate that.
I guess the concern there is that if we don't keep pace with inflation, if you will, then when we go to reevaluate that tool, because we could be looking at a very high increase based on reimbursement rates and just where the numbers fall in because of what our food costs and labor costs are to make that meal. We cannot be subsidizing with state and federal funds, with federal funds. So if you don't keep pace with that actual cost of making that meal, when we need to make an adjustment, there'll be potentially a 50, 60 cent lunch price increase.
So we're looking at it based on our cost to produce a meal more so than the state, than a mandate from the state. It just is also coincidental that that's another component to this as well. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very complicated. There's a very complicated tool that you use. We have not had to complete that tool based on federal requirements. But basically, you can't use federal funds to subsidize your paid lunch price. So let's just say the actual cost of that paid lunch to us is $3. We can't subsidize with federal funds to make up that difference. We can't use the free and reduced funds to make that whole.
We can use our fund balance to do that, but by doing that, we will erode it over
Correct.
time and not be able to catch up with a potential price shock in the future.
So I think that's a good way to articulate it. It's almost where the state's mandate meets the reality of operations, right? And so as we look at next year and projecting out, that 10-cent increase, I think, helps us with the operations and a longer-term conversation, knowing that if we don't continue to move that along, granted, that helps us with the mandate, right, for the paid lunch equity, but we could, in the long run, end up depleting our reserves to the point where it's kind of like you don't want to pay your monthly bills out of your savings account kind of concept. I think, admittedly, we do have reserves in the food service fund. I think continuing to what we talked about with the board last year was in looking at all of our 8 buildings, continuing to say, what other equipment upgrades do we need? The food service fund should just take care of that because we do have those reserves and because we came through the pandemic and accumulated even more reserves as a result of that. And so that's a good use of your reserves as a drawdown, as I'll call it one-time expenses, even though eventually, as Ms. Marlin would tell me, we do got to replace the dishwasher every 20 or 30 years, but it doesn't happen every year. And so as you draw down some of those reserves for those bigger purchases, it alleviates the strain on the general fund and also the capital reserve fund. And again, I think is a celebration really, because some food service funds at other school districts actually can't even pay the whole way of operations. The general fund is paying some of the operating costs of the food service fund, let alone the fact that our food service fund is able to stand on its own sufficiently, but also help support its own equipment purchases also. So.
Isn't there a time, and maybe it still is, but that you had to kind of break even? You don't have to break even anymore?
There are tests around your reserves, and you're allowed to accumulate reserves if it is for like things like equipment purchases. You have to justify why you have your reserves. You're allowed to have up to a certain point. It's not unlike the general fund. But in our view, that's part of that where you start to look back at the equipment purchases as well and saying, what other equipment purchases do we need to have? Now, as far as the budget goes, maybe this I should have stopped and asked the question. The deficit that's shown, that's a deficit of $28,228 with the 10-cent increase in the budget. And so we're comfortable with that deficit because the subsidies are always changing too, right? And so again, a conservative view of the budget, where we are with reserves, knowing there are equipment purchases, but also wanting to keep pace with just everything that's going on. That's where our recommendation comes from. So.
And like Mr. Longwell said, the pandemic is the main reason why we have those reserves. Those funds that we were given during the pandemic we were not going to be given those funds moving forward. This is probably the last year for most of those funds. We were given extra reimbursement, we were giving an incentive, some different things like that to help support food service programs, and those are going away.
We, as an example, through COVID, even in the spring of 2020, when we were still serving meals, they had increased the subsidies very generously, and we served something like 100,000 meals, I think, just as an example. And then the food service fund also got its own ESSER money, like the general fund, and so all of that kind of comes together with what's our plan moving forward around these reserves, what's our plan moving forward around operations, and where we feel we need to be with our prices.
So speaking about that, is like, are we going to be serving food again during the summer at all, or not?
So because breakfast is free for all students in Pennsylvania, and that is in school code now, so thanks to your legislators, we are allowed to serve breakfast for free to all students in our summer educational programs. So yes, and we will also be providing meals to the summer playground programs through the giant roundup money. So that is in a separate fund designated for providing those free meals to Friendship and Kosher Park. And we did see last summer when we were providing those free meals that we did have an increase in participation in both parks. So it's a great program. I know from doing it that kids are showing up to get those meals. So it's really important, and we do have a nice balance in that fund to sustain that program for a number of years. And we're getting, I think, about $13,000 in the check from Giant this year to help that.
So they don't do a drive-by where you're giving out
No,
lunches.
that is not allowable any longer. No.
Well, pretty much that does cover the whole summer then for those kids that really need that, between the two different ways of getting
To the end of July.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a little period at the end then where there was not.
Correct.
Any other question?
I just see a deduction in the medical insurance for this year. Is there a change in the medical insurance?
It really depends on participation. I would say in the food service fund, it's health insurance generally is flat or going up. It's going up for next year, just to be fully transparent. In the case of Ms. Marlin, and I hate to take it to like an individual level, but just speaking generically at a systems level, the elections themselves, what people decide they want or don't want for medical, influences that probably more dramatically than in the general fund, because there's so many more employees, and so you don't see, usually when there's change in the general fund expense, it's because utilization's higher and the cost of medical's gone up. With the food service fund, because it's a much smaller group of people, you get the same thing the general fund's facing, but then also what's happening with the employees and what they're picking.
Can I just throw out there, since breakfast participation, since October of 2019, we were at about 16% participation, and October of 2023, we're at 32% participation for breakfast. So thanks to our principals and our different models of breakfast service, I think that's something to be really proud of. So.
Oh, I was going to ask about the high school. We were going to have that little cafe or whatever, and I know we
do have it. Yes, we're serving breakfast out of the cafe. Yes.
Did it just start, when it first started, it was just, I don't know, coffee or drinks or something?
It was breakfast meals also. Yep.
I thought it was going to develop into something bigger.
It might at some point, but right now with construction, we're just focusing on breakfast, and then as that construction is finished and we see what that looks like, then yeah, there's a lot of opportunities.
because I thought we were doing those, I don't know, grab lunch bags or something, as if kids were leaving at lunchtime, they could grab a lunch bag.
Yeah, we've had a lot of staff shortages this year, and we haven't seen a need for that. The students who are leaving have access to the cafeteria based on the lunch meal service time, so we haven't really seen that need, but it's something that we're watching. And like I said, as that construction finishes up, we'll see what that really looks like.
And maybe said another way, there's the vision for it, and as we're still working through construction, once we get done and on the other side of construction, that'll allow us the opportunity to come back to that vision and say, what's the right deployment of these two spaces? And then to Mrs. Marlin's point, and this is another challenge we faced, everybody in the community is facing staffing shortages, but particularly in food service, as we've had some staff shortages, that's impacted too, kind of both how we've deployed staff through Mrs. Marlin's department at the different buildings and the locations. And so sometimes just maintaining the one location in each of the 8 buildings that's our probably priority one. And so then with the high school having a second location, it is something I think that's going to be nice in the future, especially as the building grows. But for now, we're just trying to get through construction and then get staffing up to speed, and then we'll continue to reassess. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Marlin. Thank you, Greg. We have enough to move this forward.
Thank you.
For every you and your staff do.
On to 2.02, Wildcat Foundation grants. Dr. Leidy?
Yes, so partners with us since 1998, and Jeff Pratt is here this evening with 2 other members of the Wildcat Foundation. John Bowles is our current president, and Aisha Noma has overseen the grant process. And thank you, sir, for your work, and both of you back there for all the effort that goes into what looks like just about $85,000 in approved funds here off the top. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Yep. Thank you for letting us present this and tell you what we do as a foundation and what we're doing with it. I updated the packet because we have an additional $2,000 grant that we're giving out through a private donor that I added on to this, so it's just an updated packet. I have some graphics on there for funding for the last several years that you can look at that Aisha has put together for us. This was my first year on the job, and this most fascinating part of my job is coordinating these grants and the programs and seeing them and finding out what the teachers do and what people in this district do. We get a great opportunity to see what innovation is. We get a great opportunity to see how people solve problems. We get a great opportunity to see what the impact is on kids. My kids are in this district, and I knew some of it anyways, but I've never fully understood what some of it was. So, our scholarship committee met on March 27th. We had 41 applications this year. We used Google Forms to get the applications from the teachers, try to advertise it, and get as many people involved in the process as we can. We had 12 foundation board members review each of those applications for the grants and go over them in a scoring matrix that we have to use to sort out how we go over them. The grants, we had meetings with building principals, Dr. Leidy, to take feedback in, to go over some things that could be sorted out, that could be either were already being funded in some way, either could be funded through the school budget process, or had funding down the line. So we sorted out, of the 41, we broke it down to 35 grants that we reviewed to go over to determine our funding for it. This is that list broken down, partial funding for some, full funding for some. We had a discussion on March 27th. We had 9 board members meet. We met for 3 hours to go back and forth over our scoring matrix, to go over the details of each program request, to see what they're asking for, and to discuss how we would divvy out what it was. The total request came in at about $108,000. We ended up at $86,350 that we're funding. Of those requests and of those 41 original requests, we had 7 that were EITC based. We do budgeted grant funding through money we raise. We do EITC, which is a state program run by the Department of Community and Economic Development that we get donations through businesses for. It's targeted funding through programs that are approved by the DCED, and there are 11 of them that we can use money for. So of the $86,350, $50,350 is what we budgeted as a minimum, but we will fund for EITC funding next year. And then $36,000 is the budgeted number for the other grant programs, which includes something we added this year through a discussion through the grant process, a $2,200 need-based grant fund that we will work through this year to see how it develops and work with the school counselors, and kind of came out of a discussion. Requests come in for many things, trips and different things. We want to find a way to target more need-based funding for some of those things when it's appropriate. And we get requests throughout the year for different things too, so we want to build something up to have for that in this case. The categories are broken down in the sheet. It's $11,900 in the wellness category, $10,125 for cultural, $9,725 for education, $2,000 for athletics, and then $2,250 is what we have in this need-based fund. And that's a fund that we may carry over. Depending on how it goes and what the requests are for it.
This is great list of programs all across the spectrum, including athletics, and as you were saying, down to need-based funding, kind of one by one. That's really cool. So
appreciate that. Hopefully, again, through working with Aisha and the committee, finding more ways to target some of the money would be a goal moving forward. And the requests are great and they're fantastic, and we would like more, and hopefully the more I can promote what we do and what's out there, the more we can get that coming back to us. But the hard part is the decision process, because there's a lot. So, but the discussion's always fascinating, and so if you sit around a table for 3 hours at night, it's a great conversation.
Is there, so you're about shy, if you wanted to fund fully 108,000, you're shy about 22,000 per year.
Yes.
Is that typical for a year, or is that?
It goes up and down a little bit. It's going to vary on EITC funding, can fluctuate based on donations we get from the businesses. It's a separate fund. Then it fluctuates on the number of requests we get each time. So, but typically we can't fund fully the requests we get. And again, ideally, if we can keep drawing, we had more requests this year. If we can keep getting more requests, we're probably not going to be able to fund them all, but the idea would be to find. We had 15 new programs submit requests this year. As a target for our foundation, innovation or something new, getting something set up and running can be a goal of what we do. So the more of that we get, and ideally some programs may cycle out as to something we do, and that would be a discussion between the foundation committee and school administrators and stuff, whether ideally something could eventually come into the school budget if we established it and it stuck, and there are programs that are doing that. And then ideally, some of these programs could move over into EITC funding. You have to get approval for them, so it's a process to go through and ask if it fits the description of what they want. And we hope that'll happen for esports is on here. It's a new middle school program that started last year. Ideally, we'll move over to EITC eventually, so transfer into that funding source.
I just want to say thank you to Mr. Pratt. You wouldn't know that it was only a year, even less than a year. The way he's able to articulate all the things that we do is incredible. And the passion that Aisha has and Mr. Bowles for, and all Wildcat Foundation members, is incredible for doing what's right for kids.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of work and detail that goes into it. It doesn't always come out that way, but there's a lot of work.
I appreciate that. It's a good board. It's for volunteers who are putting a lot of time and extra time into this, it's a very active board, finding their niche and what they do, and people who take pride in trying to figure out how this process works. And this is the focus of what we do. There's other things, but a lot of good people that try to do this the best way we can. It's fun work.
I guess I'd say to the 4 board members or 4 foundation board members who are here, thank you for extra time and effort to go through this process and everything else.
We appreciate the support of the school district, the school board. It's a process of working together, and it has to be that way. It makes it a smoother process. So there's a lot of interesting things to learn this year, but I appreciate the way people in this district work together to find solutions. We're a part of that, and it's kind of neat. I mean, finding good solutions to stuff. So
I know that I'm known for saying that it's not like this everywhere, but I think Mr. Pratt can attest to the fact, and having conversations with his colleagues from around, that we do have something unique here in terms of that partnership and collaboration. I'm reminded that there were years where 18 or 20 applications was considered a lot. 41 applications is a testament to both the ease of which the foundation has made this for teachers and staff, but also the excitement, I think, that's in the community that, listen, this is worth going for. And sometimes Mr. Longo might even fund that request through a budget or something, so it doesn't always have to come from the Wildcat Foundation. But thank you so much. I agree completely. And the support that comes through this organization is really a glowing light over this entire community, I believe.
Very much appreciated. Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. On to 2.03, construction change orders. Mr. Lund.
Mr. Kastner is with us in case there's any specific questions, but I would like to work from the attachment on the agenda that gives you a summary document of our construction projects and each of our change orders. Before I go too far with that, for maybe those who have not met Mr. Kastner, he's our construction manager. He's done a tremendous job overseeing all of our projects and does work for the district. Our approach with him has been a unique one. And back to Dr. Lay's earlier comment about it's not like this everywhere. Our colleagues are often asking us how we do it, how we manage the structure in this way, and they want the phone number of Dr. Van Drew and Dick Kastner and
Trying to steal.
more poaching, and so we've told them that they're Wildcats and they're doing a tremendous job for us, and so just wanted to make that note. For the board, in the summary, I know this probably will look familiar. It does have all of the projects listed individually. It shows everything that we've previously approved change order wise. It shows what's pending approval, and then it shows total change orders. And so I really like to just kind of look at two areas or focus on two areas. One is the pending approval column. You can look down there very quickly and see which of the projects have change orders pending approval that the board's being asked to review, and those attachments can be found individually on this agenda item, so you can kind of cross-check that to say what's the detail of the ones at the high school or even Elmwood Academy. I think the other big picture kind of benchmark that we like to often look at is in that orange column, and it's highlighted purposefully in that way, the percentage of contracts. And so all of our construction budgets, and there's a note at the bottom there, contain a 5% contingency in the budgets for change orders. And so that's a really good kind of temperature check to say, are we living within that 5%? And I think you can see with the exception of that Elmwood Academy site project, which had its own uniqueness, all of our other projects are living in that 2 to 3% range, which is well within the 5% corridor that we've established. And I'll say this, a lot of credit to Mr. Kastner, Mr. Harris, Mr. Hoffman. I don't want to leave anyone off. There's a great team that has weekly and daily conversations about everything that's happening at the high school, at our other building projects, and all of that comes together, and ultimately also managing change orders and making sure we're getting through the projects in a timely way. We're not delayed. And so all of that has gone very well over the last, I'll say, 8 or 9 years, actually. So.
I hardly have anything to complain about anymore.
In all seriousness, it has a lot to do with that gentleman sitting right there. And I know how good this district is wanting a perfect score. And so you look at 9 out of 10. Well, what about that one? Right, that one at 7.8%. And here's the reality, and Dick, you're welcome to add to this, that the potential site project and change order there, in lieu of it being $33,000, could have been a couple $100,000 if we had not pushed back on some of the issues that we felt were maybe beyond the scope of what needed to be done. And so even though $33,000, no one likes that, it's a lot better than several $100,000, which I think was part of what the solution was.
Just the inflation on that alone. from when it started to
Probably
when.
accounts for that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's a true situation of what goes around comes around. So we're almost back where we started.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, so.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Dick, that you can take credit for all of this, because it wasn't always this way.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
appreciate your hard work.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you. There's a lot of help out there.
So can
It's a
I
great team all the way around.
ask, the 33,000 we're talking about with Elmwood relates to the last bit of connection or non-connection at Shepherdstown, and the two pieces that come out of Shepherdstown, right? So we're paying to kind of wrap that up in the way it is, but we had we known that we wouldn't, that connecting at the far end was so cumbersome to do, costly, we wouldn't have built it that way, or we wouldn't have like approved that. So like I'm like, it's confusing that we're just gonna like wrap it up and leave this like kind of half road there when really we wouldn't have designed it that way. I'm sure it's nice to have maintenance, to have extra, access, but I don't know. I guess I'm asking like, why didn't Crabtree tell us this 5 years ago when they showed us this plan?
We could have finished it. I think what the issue was is when both the municipality and the Department of Transportation got involved in it and said, you're going to have to now widen that road to 3 lanes, the entire length of it. You're going to have to put parking on the one side. You're going to have to run a sidewalk the whole way. Those were things that had not been decided when we were looking at the plans, because that came from the Department of Transportation after the fact. And so when you started adding up the numbers associated with what they wanted to do, which frankly had a lot more to do with the growth of the community than what the school district was done, but guess who was going to foot the bill for it? And we said, whoa, wait a second. And then we found a principal in that building that actually was able to direct the traffic appropriately through the parking lot. And we started, I guess through the COVID thing, we started getting the traffic moving through and realized, wait, this is actually a better process than what we had. So to do the widening, to do the other things I mentioned, possibly, we don't even know this, but maybe had to move a water line, several hundred yards of water line. That's where the few $100,000, and it probably would have been in excess of that today.
Yeah, it came out to $307,000 and be more than that now. And what it was a domino effect, where PennDOT would get something and look at it. Because they send it around to probably 10 different groups in-house, and one of their outfits would pick up, well, I see we're doing this. We need to do that if we're gonna do this. And it just kept snowballing, literally.
To the point that you couldn't even turn in. And when you turned out, you only could turn out to the right. And it was like, wait a second, this is completely going against the whole design of this. So
We have less utility in terms of the whole site use.
Right.
At a huge cost. And there was no value in that at all. One of the reasons, though, that we're keeping the road where it is, ending it there, is that we have some stormwater drains down that way. So rather than moving anything or adding cost to do that, might as well leave it where it is. It'll all work drainage-wise the way it was originally designed.
I get that we're making lemonade out of the lemons we've been given, and I think that's a helpful explanation that we couldn't have known at the outset, because like we paid $33,000 to not have a connection, but I get that the connection wouldn't have been. So thank you for that explanation.
So it would cost us to rip that road up too, if we chose not to have it there anymore.
The more that you looked at doing that, the more it would cost. We can stop it where it is now, sort of strike it off right where the catch basins are at the end, and essentially cost nothing.
Mr. Mr. Underkoffler might start like a driver's ed program for 4th and 5th graders or something.
I think we could like, have a bowling alley painted on it or something.
Like a golf cart or something.
Yeah.
I do like that without lemonade.
Business officers, all right, anything else on change orders while we're on this subject? Mr. Kastner's here. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you as always.
Great, that's the end of my agenda, committee meeting adjourned.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the April 23rd, 2024 work session. I'd like to announce that meetings in the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. Moving on to item 3, curriculum. Item 3.01, curriculum maps, social studies. Dr. Liney.
Yes, so love being able to talk to the board about the work being done in curriculum areas. And this one, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Bitts to do a little further introduction.
Good. Yeah, definitely excited to be able to share with you some updates in a couple different academic program areas here tonight. We're going to start with the K through 5 social studies, development, English, and folks, come on up, pull up another chair. We have a team approach because it's taken a team to be able to work through this. Anybody that's been in the district for a while knows that this is something that has constantly been on the list of things for us to look at, social studies at the elementary level. And the sad reality of many things in that academic program realm is that there are certain subject areas that oftentimes are pushed to the back burner for various reasons. And one of those is that certainly at the elementary level, social studies has never been a tested subject. And certainly as a district, we believe that the program that we provide to our students goes so far beyond just what is tested by the state, which is happening this week, by the way, PSSA is this week, so luck to our students. But our program is so much more than that. And we believe that having a social studies program for our youngest learners to be able to learn and grow in is vitally important. And we're going to talk about that here a little bit tonight. And we also know, and research has shown us time and again, that social studies and science is what brings to life literacy and math. And it was time for us to take this step to dig in and have a team of folks that were putting in the hard work to be able to make this happen. And we're really excited to be able to bring you some updates and obviously some maps tonight, and for that to launch the continued development of this program. So we'll start with a little bit about the context. So what is our current status? And I just kind of hinted at that a little bit here, but we'll talk about current status of curriculum in general, and then more specifically our K through 5 social studies curriculum. So this is a graphic that many of you have seen before, and I'm just going to give you the 30-second elevator pitch around it. But we really look at this as 3 different columns. So you can go by the color coding, not necessarily the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 as I described this. We look at our academic program at the curriculum level, the unit level, and the lesson level. Our curriculum level is what our goals are for our students from a K through 12 program standpoint. What are those goals that we want students to transfer? What are those things that we want them to understand in the big picture as they work through our system? And those understandings are the same, those large understandings are the same for a first grader as they are for an 11th grader. But then we take those and look specifically at the standards, the skills, and the more specific understandings and the knowledge that we want students at each one of those levels to be able to know, understand, and do. So at the curriculum level, that is where you come into play as a board and you approve that broad curriculum level to say, yes, this is the curriculum that we want to be met by our students, and it includes the standards, and this is where we want our students to be working. Once we get past that curriculum level that's tied to the standards, then we take that curriculum and we say, all right, if this is what we're working with, how do we break this into units for our students at X grade level. So for third graders, how do we want our third graders to experience this curriculum as one step in their journey from K to 12? And they develop unit plans, which consists of goals. It consists of common assessments now that every third grader, regardless of the teacher or the school that they work in or that they go to, will take those assessments. And then a unit plan of saying, here is how we organize the units, and this is the general structure of what we want these units within the curriculum to look like. Then our teachers take those units that have been developed collaboratively and they make the magic happen at the lesson level. So they take the goals that have been identified and they may add some assessments that they know their students in their classrooms need, and they develop the plan of how they're going to bring that to life for their students at the lesson level. So again, when we talk tonight about the curriculum level, that's what we're asking the board to be able to review on these curriculum level maps, and then ultimately to be able to look at in our next voting session to be able to approve. Because with those in place, then we're able to take this to the next level, create units, and bring it to life for our students. So the current state, as we think about that graphic, and we'll talk a little bit in some different grade level bands because it does vary a little bit by grade level band, is specifically a K through 5, I think we can say that there's a lack of a guaranteed and viable social studies curriculum in general. That has been the case for a while, and as I said, we have had lots of other curriculum efforts that we have been making for many years and have done amazing things with, and it was time for us to look at social studies because we need a guaranteed and viable experience for our students when it comes to social studies. That's even more pronounced at the K through 3 level, frankly. We have very little by the way of any defined curriculum for social studies curriculum for our K through 3 students, beyond just the things that have naturally been brought into ELA at different times and brought into science at different times. There are experiences there, but when you talk about a holistic picture, as I described for you in that 9-box matrix, we haven't had much in the way of that defined curriculum to this point. At the 4-5 level, there has been some work done, and when we moved to content specialists a number of years ago, we had it set up such that our math teachers were teaching science and social studies for all of our 4th and 5th graders, and the other teacher was teaching ELA. The way that fell out was basically most of our math teachers were teaching about half the year in science curriculum and the other half of the year in social studies. So there was a little bit of unit development, but that was not done with any connection to the secondary program. So it was really done in isolation as something that really was specific to 4th and 5th grade topics, and really not connected to the rest of the program. So let's talk a little bit about this. I mentioned that we believe that this is important, and the question is, what makes social studies so important at the elementary level? Well, we know that for reading comprehension, knowledge is power, and there's a quote there at the bottom, building knowledge in the classroom brings equity. And depending on who you talk to in the world of literacy right now, you'll hear people talk about different kinds of constructs and philosophies around literacy. But whether you talk about the 5 pillars of literacy, which came out of the National Reading Panel back in the early 2000s, or whether you talk about maybe more recent work that's been done around Scarborough's reading rope, you're really looking still at the importance of vocabulary. You're looking at the importance of background knowledge and those language structures, literacy knowledge, verbal reasoning, to be able to bring to life for students what they're reading about and what they're writing about. It's incredibly important that we provide those experiences and that knowledge to our students. Again, not just for the sake of building their social studies knowledge and awareness going into the secondary level, but to really bring their literacy skills to a different level of application. So then we look at, if we believe that these connections to our 6 through 12 level are so important, then what does ground our 6 through 12 social studies curriculum? Because I can tell you that the work that Clay McAllister and his team at the secondary level has done over the last number of years has been amazing work. And they have transformed what the social studies experience for our students looks like. And it was really important to us as we began this effort at the K through 5 level to be able to work right alongside of them. And they have. Mr. McAllister, Mrs. Lukanich, and other social studies teachers have worked right beside our elementary teachers to be able to bring this to life for our K through 5 folks. So I'm going to pass it off to Mrs. Bear. And I just have to say before I do that, tonight perhaps is one of the first times that you get a chance to interact with our academic team that you have supported us putting in place over the last several years. And between Mrs. Woodall and Mrs. Bachman, Mrs. Broombaugh, you'll hear from in a little bit when we talk about our curriculum. You have an amazing team that is working right now on our academic program and bringing all this work to life. And then we have amazing administrators like Mrs. Bear, who's able to come alongside these efforts. Mrs. Gibblin's going to talk about that from the ARC perspective, that they pull in other expertise to be able to really do some really great work. So I'm going to turn it over to them and take it from here.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about what grounds our 6-12 curriculum. Like Andy said, one of the huge benefits and exciting things about the work that we've done so far has been that it has been in conjunction with the secondary social studies team, which for me as somebody who's been really isolated to elementary for such a long time, that was really powerful for me to gain that perspective. So the secondary social studies curriculum is grounded in the historical thinking skills. These have grounded social studies curriculum since 2019, and that is what the 6 through 12 transfer goals are directly connected to. So historical thinking skills are just a set of critical skills that help students analyze historical events, evidence, and perspective, and they didn't just come out of nowhere either. They came from UCLA and Stanford, and they are used by the AP College Board to help drive creating the AP assessments. So we're really excited about the prospect of empowering students to think critically and taking everything that social studies has already done, which has been so powerful and so meaningful, and articulate it down even to the level of our kindergartners. So the historical thinking skills, there's 5 of them, and Linda in a moment is going to talk through their connection not only to the social studies transfer goals, but also to the ELA transfer goals, but I'll just give you a quick preview of what the 5 are. Chronological thinking is helping students think about cause-effect relationships, timeline, that kind of thing. Historical comprehension, analysis, and interpretation are related similarly to how ELA and literacy are related. It's seeking to understand history and then analyze and interpret that. There's also historical research skills, which is using things like primary resources and secondary resources to gain perspective about historic events. And historical issues, which digs really deeply into analyzing history. There's a lot about decision making and how decisions affect the world today. So Linda's going to dive into a little bit more about how that connects to the transfer goals in both social studies and ELA.
Yes. So our intentions then to bring social studies into the ELA curriculum, we looked at the question, how do the two connect? And when we put the documents alongside one another, immediately academic verbs stood out to us. When we looked at the social studies transfer goals, the words like analyze and explain, interpret, determine validity, engage in research, evaluate impact. Truth be told, we had to go back and cover up the heading because we thought we were looking at the ELA transfer goals. All of those things, when you ask students to engage in analysis, to read deeply, to process research, those are the things we're striving for when we went to build critical readers, writers, speakers, listeners, and thinkers. As we took a closer look, we were able to make direct correlations. As an example, you see in the second social studies transfer goal, read, analyze, and interpret sources critically to gain perspective of events or concepts. These are directly correlated to the first 2 transfer goals in ELA that speak to reading, that ask our students to independently navigate complex pieces of text, and to be able to read critically, to be consumers in recognizing and understanding multiple perspectives and cultures. As we continued to interact with the transfer goals, we were brought back again to the mission. And the mission and vision statement, as with any process in our district, is something that constantly grounds our work. And we, again, in looking at our mission, felt affirmed in taking the approach of focusing on thinking skills versus content. We were reminded that the content base of history is going to continue to evolve. It's going to be impossible for us to teach discrete facts and to do that well. Our students have the information at their fingertips. So our job isn't about giving our students access, but more so helping our students be able to think critically, to be able to critically read, to engage in writing, to engage in discourse so that they can be productive, responsible citizens in a diverse and ever-changing global society.
As Dr. Bitts had stated, this has been a time in the making, and this committee work actually started last year. So last year, Mrs. Baird and Mrs. Bachman led a K-5 committee with stakeholders of elementary educators, administrators, district office administrators, and then secondary social studies teachers as well. The committee had 3 main goals. The first goal was to articulate the historical thinking skills and what they would look like and sound like K-5. They created the journey of Harry the historical thinker, which was a little stick guy that the committee went through and started at kindergarten. What does historical thinking look and sound like in kindergarten? What does it look and sound like in 1st grade? And it went the whole way through the K-5 journey, which would connect up through the 6 to 12 journey. Then they worked to identify a scope and sequence of social studies themes to be taught while grounding the themes in the vision, mission, beliefs, and the developmental readiness of our students. 5 themes. What we're talking about is we're talking about the spiraling of the themes of exploration, innovation, communities, and leadership. So we're not looking at specific content, even though we're going to be integrating content, but the spiraling of the themes is what we were really looking at. Secondary has assured us they want us to really focus on the historical thinking skills at the elementary level. So when they hit 6th grade, they can really focus on the content of the world, as they talk, the history of the world as they get it through 6 to 12. So those 4 themes are what spiraled as part of this committee. And then also identify what social studies integration looks like and doesn't look like. So unlike 6 to 12, where social studies is a standalone course, this is being integrated into English language arts. So it's we need to be purposeful about what that integration looks like, so we're not losing the integrity of our English language arts curriculum. We're enhancing it and we're enriching it by doing the integration. That led to some of the committee work this year. So a smaller team of the 3 of us, Mrs. Bachman, Mr. McAllister, and Mrs. Miller, so those are both secondary teachers, we've gotten together and worked on vertical articulation of the knows and do's. So what are the students going to know and do as a result of the social studies curriculum? We utilized backwards design, starting with the AP College Board standards, and said, this is what AP College Board says students need to be able to know and do, and we literally went backwards from there, 12th grade, 11th grade, all the way down to kindergarten. As part of that, we also decided on how to organize our curriculum maps. At the elementary level, we decided to organize the curriculum maps in bands because of the integration. Again, 6 to 12 is different because they have standalone social studies courses, but we're integrating, so we didn't want to create a singular social studies map for kindergarten, a singular social studies map for 1st grade, because we were thinking about the messaging that may send to teachers. Whereas we have the band, we're sending the messaging of we're integrating this content into our ELA curriculum. Then we also, so with all of that, we created the curriculum level maps that you see in front of you today, well, on the board agenda today. So you'll see all new K to 5 social studies curriculum maps, but then you'll also see a revision of the 6 to 12 maps. And that revision is because as we did the vertical articulation, we tweaked some of the knows and do's at the secondary level to ensure that we truly were having consistent terminology, vocabulary, and expectations K to 12. And I'm going to leave you with a quote that sort of wraps back up to what Dr. Bitts was discussing earlier. So if you would take a minute to read this quote by Brandon Wiley, who is the Chief Academic Officer at University of Pennsylvania and has an expertise in building global confidence. We are excited to continue on this journey of integrating social studies curriculum into K-5 to build those engaging experiences for our students and creating those innovative, creative, curious thinkers that our mission that we believe in. So with that, do we have any questions?
I have a question. So what you're saying is that at 4-5, social studies is going to be taught by the ELA teacher.
It's going to be built, yes.
Does that seem like, and you start off by saying about half the year the math teacher had taught a version of this. Does that seem like a lot more work that's going to the other, to the ELA teacher, or is it just a different version of their day?
I would say, and Mrs. Barrett could probably speak to this as well, but I would say it's a different version of their day. So our ELA teachers are already pulling and utilizing a variety of fictional and non-fictional resources for teaching. This just sort of helps to structure more of what those resources are doing in terms of building background knowledge for students.
And then would science still continue to be taught by the math teacher?
Science will still be continue to be taught by the math teacher, and work yet to come is redoing our science curriculum to align with the STEEL standards. So the math teachers will need some of that additional time to be able to ensure that we are teaching our students science that's more global.
I have the same question though for K-3. How does that work with what, what their day is organized like? We kind of explore that when we get to see them, and it's a lot of reading and a lot of, so is that more, I gotta shoehorn this into my day somehow, or what?
Again, I think it goes back to very similar to 4 and 5, is they're already pulling those resources for their fictional and non-fictional text. This just sort of helps to streamline what themes they're going to be talking about. So to help build that knowledge throughout, rather than, this month we're talking about Christmas trees, now we're pulling in the Lorax. It just creates some more of that consistency with knowledge building.
Well, it's the history of Christmas trees or
Yeah.
No, I was gonna ask can you give us an example of how you tie it into the ELA?
So for example, I would say right now we're talking about this at the 4th grade level. So they're working on what their unit, the iLife unit?
Yeah,
Yes,
the
iLife.
current iLife unit is a narrative-based unit, so they can, if the theme is communities or leadership, they can pull in texts about, so one of the content themes that they're actually already doing, I think we presented to the board a few years ago actually about the civil rights bus tour, where students were engaging with learning about civil rights. That's been in the iLife curriculum for a long time now, and there's a lot of integration of social studies already happening there. So they can pull in historical fiction texts that they can dive deeply with, but we can beef it up and we can make it more meaningful by also pulling alongside primary resources, like what secondary does, and exposing them to those to help them think more critically about those fiction texts. So that would be one example where you might take a book like one of the things that they taught previously in their curriculum was Freedom on the Menu by Carol Boston Weatherford. And it's about the civil rights movement, about the Greensboro sit-ins. They can come alongside that and pull in images from that time period, newspaper headlines from that time period, and engage in those primary resources to help enrich what that text already is saying. And then they can write about it, they can have discourse about it, and so all of those pieces come together to create a more holistic and literacy-rich environment for our students.
And what Mrs. Bear was talking about as well is having that discussion. So it's really having authentic speaking. So we know that literacy is reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So having those authentic discussions about topics that are engaging to the students as well, and lead to some real life thinking complexities there.
Well, the challenges that we've had forever, especially with our youngest learners, is that we're teaching them skills, and we're also using content to teach those skills, right? And so this has been already stated, saying let's be more intentional about utilizing the things that we know in social studies from a historical thinking skills perspective, not just simply who fought in this war or who was the president at this time. And that to me was the sale, because I gotta be honest with you, I've not always been a fan of integration. I think that you have to make sure that you are explicitly teaching the skills, and if simultaneously you're teaching content, that can be really challenging for students. What I love about this solution is that the content is exposing them to ways of thinking about social studies without it being about the social studies specifically. That's reserved still for 6 through 12. And that's why I'm just like, I'm sitting here just so excited, because I can't wait to see, and I know our teachers are going to bring this to life in a way that is just going to take it to a level that we don't even know yet what they're going to be able to do with this.
So do the kids have to memorize the 50 states and 50 capitals anymore?
They do not, and that's exactly what we're talking about, is that that's something that you can look that up, so pretty quickly.
So, yeah, Dr. Lighty used the word integration. I was thinking of, which I really appreciate. I appreciate the collaboration. Holistic is another word. There's got to be a way to group these all together, but I just appreciate the way that you are looking at it holistically across elementary, middle school, secondary, across just different disciplines. I just really appreciate kind of that systemic approach, maybe I'll call it. And we've heard that at other times, but just seeing, I love, you're the 4th and 5th grade assistant principal, but you're introducing the 6th through 12th grade curriculum, at least as it pertains to this. I just really think there's value in that integration.
So we're all assuming the internet's going to be here forever and ever and ever.
Something better will
Look
be.
at all the content you want, right?
Something better will be here, probably.
Well, I think the critical reading skills and all that are super important right now. With all the misinformation, AI, we need to be able to at least cut through that and make sure we're understanding what we're reading. I assume like with kindergarten level, and we're not going to bring in like non-fictional historical text. We're probably going to start with fiction, start teaching some of those skills, and then the mouse that was at the battle or something, and you talk about the mouse. And I know my daughter just did the adoption training, I think, and she was sharing that with me, and it really built for her some empathy and understanding things that have happened in the past that maybe she doesn't understand. And so that really has helped her understanding. And of course, going through all the role, what's that thing that you're looking at and everything? And I imagine this also ties in with the one project as well, the science exhibits. No, it's really exciting.
And just as you said though, with like kindergarten students, one of their themes is community, which is already something that kindergarten, what they do down there is building communities. So they're going to be looking at more like community level history here in Mechanicsburg. So they're not going to be going in super detailed.
Cultural.
Sure.
Yeah, I would just tag on to that. We know that it's important developmentally for our youngest learners. They're still thinking very egocentrically. So you'll see in those early primary levels, again, close to themselves, learning about themselves, learning about their community close by, and broadening that to the greater community, to the state, to the country, to the world as they get up in grade levels. So you'll see that expansion across K through 5.
I guess because I have a little bit of a familiarity with big maps, I have a few detailed questions that I can't help asking. Why are some things highlighted yellow in maps? I couldn't figure it out. Okay, so you don't know either. That's probably just something that happened by accident, this and that. I couldn't figure that out. So then, on a more broader level, I noticed in some of the maps, there are reading standards that are included, listed there, and then in some cases there are not. So how is that made? And does that mean they're taken out of the ELA curriculum and they're put here, or how does that all work?
The K-5 level, we took the social studies standards particularly. I think it's the 6 to 12 that have more of the reading standards in there. When they're doing their unit maps for K-5, they're going to be pulling from their literacy curriculum maps that you already approved, and then the K to 5 maps, and they're putting them together. The 6 to 12 maps do have the literacy standards built in, because again, 6 to 12, they're standalone classes. So whenever they were going through, Mrs. Brombach, whenever you guys designed your classes back, or your curriculum maps back in 2019, they were purposefully pulling in those literacy standards at the secondary level.
So I noticed, like, I think it was 6th grade that didn't have any literacy standards. I thought it was. There was only at 7th and 8th grade, I didn't notice any literacy standards listed. So that, again, maybe I just didn't see it, but I wondered if that was gonna be one of my questions, because I see it in 6th grade, I see it, and I don't see it in 7th and 8th, and then I see it 9, 10, 11, 12. And I know from just experience here, I know they're using literacy, and I know that's part of what they're teaching. So just wondering too about just who's going to be responsible for those standards, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Those broken down in 3-year periods, like 6, 11, say it one more time. Are they broken down in like 3-year periods like that? Like there's like grade 6, there's grade 9, there's grade 11, there's like, yeah, the standards.
Not social studies.
Okay.
Mrs. Brumbaugh, maybe you could chime in here. I believe the reading ones are pulled over specific to the research.
Yes.
Okay, that's the map from ELA that's being pulled over.
Right. Transfer goal 4. Okay, yes, transfer goal 4, that makes a little bit, sorry, I don't have them in front of me right now, but yes, transfer goal 4 for ELA and transfer goal 4 for social studies were so similar that we actually decided as a K-12 team that we would just utilize the transfer goal 4 curriculum map for ELA and social studies, because social studies is historical research for transfer goal 4, and transfer goal 4 in ELA is research. You're like, these are married, they're the same thing.
I noticed, so all the standards and research in the K-2 map are all literacy standards. There are no social
Yeah,
studies.
because that's
and
the ELA
social
map,
studies.
we just pulled it over.
This is really great. I should start off by saying that before I got the question. I'm really excited to see like more building and holistic view of this. The same with hopefully science soon. But does that also we're settled on ELA then in elementary? Is that right? Or is there more beyond? No. Okay.
Plenty more.
Where are we on
Never
that?
Plenty more to come here, but
Okay.
also if you think back to our comprehensive plan, one of our biggest parts of goal number 1 is to be developing a cycle of curriculum review to really get to a place where we have things back in a cycle where we're devoting our time, talent, and treasure on a particular curricular area, and then we know that another area is still in a different phase where we don't have to devote the same kinds of resources to that particular curricular area. So we're getting closer to that, and some different steps that we're taking logistically and format-wise is going to help us also get to that, back to that cycle. But that's going to be really important, especially for our primary teachers who teach it all. So making sure that we're able to devote our resources to one area and then shift our focus through a cycle.
Do you anticipate resources being needed for some of this as we move?
Well, it sounds a lot more interesting than memorizing capitals and states, so I'm sure the kids are more excited about it.
Did you say
We'll have a lot more to read, write, and talk about than what they did over the weekend.
Did you say there were 4 themes? Could you reiterate?
Yes.
There's 4 themes, and do they go all the way down to the lowest grade?
So K-5 is the one that's mostly built on theming. So not that secondary doesn't have themes, but they bring in more of the content. But the themes K-5 are exploration, innovation, communities, and leadership. So we've spiraled those themes up. K-3 will do 2 themes per year, and then 4 and 5 will have 3 themes built into theirs, and they're spiraled up through, so the kids get to build upon it as they go up.
And those, of course, lead into large themes in high school.
Excellent job.
questions? Yeah, it's good design.
Long time in the making.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Harris is sitting back there with a big grin on his face because he's been asking for this for what, 20-some years? Thank you. Great job.
Yep.
work you've done. Move on to item 3.02, curriculum maps art. Dr. Laddie.
Yeah, so the board may recall that back in January, we brought forward a very preliminary view because we were at a point in the year where the high school course registration guide was getting ready to be published, and we wanted to share with the board some of the really awesome thinking that is going on in the art department. At that time, however, we weren't ready to go to this level of the curriculum maps. But now we are, and so the aforementioned Mrs. Broomball is here representing our secondary curriculum and the work that's happening there. And Mrs. Giblin is our art department coordinator. Ladies, I'll turn it over to you to share what we have here.
Thank you, Dr. Lighty. This has been in the making for a while as well, so we're very excited to bring it to you. I'm honored to talk a little bit about the curricular work. How our journey, how we got here, and Lynette is the fearless leader of the art department, K-12, and this really was a team effort. One of the things I'm very excited about it is that as we wrote this, it was there were representatives K-12 there. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's K-5 and 6-12, but with this department, we had everyone there the whole time. We just met after school today at the middle school, and I shared this with them. They're very excited for me to share their work with you today. This is our students. These are some works by our students, by the way. They're very talented K-12, many gifted students in the district. So the art curriculum really is divided into 3 different areas, and we follow the Pennsylvania standards. And you can think of it as being three buckets, really. So when the students are in an art class, they will create, they will critique, and they will impact, and talk about the impact of art. And it's important to note that it is that comprehensive, because many of you, I know I had an experience in my art education where it was just about creating something. This is much more comprehensive than that, and the teachers are intentional in making sure all of these areas are experiences that our students have K-12. These are the transfer goals that Dr. Vitz had referred to earlier this evening. There are 3 transfer goals in art, and I'll just be quiet and give you a moment to read those. You can see there are 3 transfer goals that represent each of those buckets, and these goals are the same. K-12, and as students move through the system, they will interact with these goals at the appropriate developmental stage. It's important to note that these transfer goals work together. They're not, even though they're isolated in the curriculum maps, they very much function together, and you'll see all of these things happening just like you would see reading, writing, speaking, and listening in the classroom. Another set of goals beyond the academic goals are the studio habits of mind. And so these are really mindsets that artists use when they approach their work. And they are very intentional about teaching these to students. One of the elementary art teachers was just telling me last week how she has the little kids close their eyes and envision before they even start art in the classroom. What do you envision? And they're very proud of these because these are the types of thinking that can benefit all of us beyond the art classroom. So the question always is, so you wrote this curriculum, what should we see different in the classroom? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. When we write a curriculum, we capture what's happening, what is, but we also vision with the curriculum. So some of this is it's a snapshot of what's happening, and some of it is a goal for us moving forward. So the first goal really is making sure that we're teaching and assessing for understanding in the classroom. So we want to move beyond just knowing vocabulary words or doing a skill, but to have conceptual understanding that will transfer when they're in different situations and the teacher's not right there with them. They're looking at things through different perspectives, they're empathizing, they're self-evaluating, all of those types of skills. The second goal is literacy, which is a goal in all of our content areas because you can't get to understanding without reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And I think if you were to go into our art classrooms, you would see this happening. A 7th grade art teacher told me just today that art is created in community, and it really made me think about this idea that learning is social, and that is happening in our classrooms. They're talking, they're critiquing each other's art, and so on. The third goal, of course, is vertical alignment, and this really is the systemic look, as Dr. Lebo was saying. It's the child's journey. We want to make sure they're not doing the same thing year after year, that they're advancing, it's becoming more rigorous, it looks different. And so the maps allow us to do that. We have anchors along the way. And finally, we're hoping to talk more about opportunities for these cross-disciplinary opportunities with art and other areas. Knowing there are many ways that art fits into different areas. We just need time to talk to the other content areas and see where can we make these natural connections, or at least to allow students to see the connections where they are in the art class. So we just changed the sequence of courses. Thank you for approving that for our art classes. So we now know that students, when they enter the program at the secondary level at the high school, they will first take the introductory art class where they're exposed to all the different kinds of visual arts, and then they can have a more specialized area. If they know they're interested in drawing and painting, they can just take the course on that, and then maybe another course in that area. And this very much aligns to what we're trying to get to at the curriculum, which is learning deeper, more time to go deeper in the area of interest. And it also allows students to take some autonomy. There's more self-directed in the choices that they're making, and self-direction is a very important part of our mission. What do we hope students see as they move through our program? We know that the art teachers would say they want them to look at the world differently. I just asked them this afternoon, so I asked them this question. Here's some things I wanted to share with you. We hope that they see the joy that can come from sticking with one program or one project all the way through. We hope they can see detail and notice the world. We hope that they slow down. We hope that they see their value in making choices and discovering their own voice. We hope that they can see that art is joyful and it's something they can do the rest of their lives, whether they're good at it or not. So there's so many things they want them to see through this program. But it's also important to note that creativity is not a soft skill. It's really valuable in the marketplace, and so we're hoping to make some connections to careers as well. This is a quote that I thought was really compelling. I just wanted to share it with you. So thinking creatively really is a valuable skill to have in many different areas. You may have heard of the idea of STEAM, with science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and how they work together. These are just some of the jobs that are out there. We know that there are engineering firms that will hire a whole branch of people coming out of college that have these artistic skills. And so we want students to realize that what they have is a gift in many different ways in their lives. And finally, I think that you'll find that the whole program is really open to all students. The art teachers want all students to feel like this is something they can do and find success with, and they're very intentional about that. I think that's about it for the curriculum. So Lynette, if you wanted to add anything, if if you have questions, we're happy to answer them. Any questions to start, and then I can go from there?
I just wondered why we went with a 4-5. I assume it's the structure of our school, kind of, I know the standards too, line 3,
Yeah,
5.
it's the way the standards, says PA standards are benchmark 3, 5, 8, 12. So we just decided to go along with that, which then very nicely aligns to the way our district set the grade levels, so.
Can you talk more about how the linkage to careers can be imparted to, a high school kid that's just taking that, the path that you just talked about is like, I'm in sculpture, I'm in, and you're like, great, did you know you can work at Microsoft? Like, it seems like an odd, disconnect that they may not make. So.
There's a couple of ways that can happen. More often than not, when they're doing their senior high school project, where they have to go out and observe, do 3 observations in the work world. A lot of times students will come to us and say, this is what I'm interested in, who should I go observe? Or where can I go observe? And so then they kind of work with Leilani and the other people who are setting these job observations up for the kids and saying, okay, there are these opportunities for the kids. And if there's nothing close, they can do some kind of a virtual observation. So that's one of the ways that we're getting the kids to realize that, okay, I've taken all these classes, what can I do with this? Or I'm interested in the arts, what can I do with this? Because so many people are set in the mindset of, you either become a painter or you can teach art, and that's it. And that's not it. There are thousands of jobs that are out there for all of these people who are going into the arts. There are jobs that I don't even know, that I have former students contact me and say, hey, I'm in California doing this with this movie company, and it's because we took these art classes. So trying to find the different pathways to get them into what they will succeed at because of their skills in the arts. So just those job observations are one of the ways when they're going and looking at colleges. As they start to look at the majors within colleges, they themselves start to realize, I don't just have to sculpt. I can take this and I can go this pathway, or I can go this pathway. So it starts with what we're doing here, but then because of the opportunities that our district really affords our students outside of what we teach, they can go even further with what they want to do. So there's a couple ways to go about that. And we don't limit them. We don't, they come to us and say, I have this idea. Well, do you know that this is an opportunity? Or do you know that this, I had another former student who actually I just talked to, is a tattoo artist, a very well-known tattoo artist. And he told me I talked to him about a week ago, he said, oh, by the way, I did a blog and I gave a shout out to you because you really made me realize that I wanted to do something in the arts, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, and you kept pushing me, and I found this because of that. So it's just trying to make these students realize what their capabilities are, and that there's so many opportunities out there for them to exceed or succeed in those different career pathways.
And I do want to say that Microsoft would probably have a marketing or advertising department. So somebody with took art classes here in high school could still work for Microsoft.
Oh, yeah, no, it'd be great if they did. I think it's the idea of like, how can you put all those things in front of a 14 to 18-year-old and have them, like, how are you able to survey those things? And you answer my question.
There are, it's more this, not just what we do, but again, because of what they are afforded through our high school, the different opportunities that they have. But really, when they start to look at colleges and they start to look at art majors, there are vast numbers of art majors, and so many kids don't realize it until they start that exploration, and they think, well, I just want to draw and paint, and then they realize, oh, I can go into movie making, I can go into video design, I can go into the music industry. There's a lot of different things, lighting, theater. There's a lot of different options.
I really like how it's not just creation skills like you mentioned, but also how creativity is a process. It's something that maybe you start off good at, but you get in the habit of trying to continuing to improve, and then also bringing these other skills like fatigue. Because I think, back to just explaining yourself, just communicating. When you have to communicate your feelings and why you did it that way, boy, that's a lot harder than maybe talking about historical text. No offense, but like,
It is.
it's like the thing. So it requires a lot of introspection and understanding of yourself, and just the brainstorming skills. I mean, these are the things that are transferable to different career paths.
I think too, along what you were saying is we have, as a department and as a group of teachers who want to do what's best for our students, have evolved tremendously in this process. When I first started teaching in the district, a lot of it was about product. What's that end product? And now it's not. It's about the process. And even at the elementary level, through the middle school level, through the high school, the amount of choice that these children have to express themselves. You talk about literacy, and I remember one of the first literacy committees we had as a district. I was on it, and a middle school teacher said, "What are you doing on this committee? It's about literacy." I'm like, You ever heard of visual literacy? That's where literacy started, and then the written word came about. And so to have our students be visually literate, to be able to express themselves, and a lot of times they would create these pieces, but we were missing that component of getting them to talk about or to write about. And we have them do that so much more now. So when you see the piece and you read their reflection, you're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea where this was coming from. And for a lot of them, it's a very therapeutic process. It helps them to find themselves and work through things that are difficult to work through. So there's a lot going on in our classrooms that I think is amazing for our students.
Well, I think a fine example of that was a couple weeks ago, we were at the 4-5 Center, and we saw all the kids with their reports, and they weren't told, oh, everybody has to do a poster, because, there might have been a poster, there might have been a 3-board thing, there might have been a PowerPoint. So, they had the choice of doing whatever they wanted, and just having the choices, just what am I most interested in to create with their reporting was amazing, because everybody was different.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
I just have to add, because it's, I love when connections get made in these conversations and presentations to things that we're hearing external. Dr. Bitts and I had the opportunity last week to go down to the University of Pennsylvania and hear some just absolutely phenomenal speakers talking about the world in which we're living now and the world in which our children are going to be living. And the idea was about this thing called the brain economy. And so that was this presentation on last Thursday. And as I'm sitting here listening to both of these presentations, I'm struck by our staff and their pursuit of making sure that we're preparing our kids for the things that are out there. And I'm not sure they're thinking about brain economy, but here's the 3 things that was talked about. Thinking skills over content. Think about that in terms of what we saw here in social studies, right? And even in art, instead of just the product, just create this. Let's critique it. Let's talk about the impact of it, the thinking skills related to the creativity, right? The interdisciplinary nature of work that now is more important maybe than ever. And it goes to this idea that, yeah, you can get hired at Microsoft with a creativity background, because guess what? That's what you're doing all day and producing what Microsoft needs you to do, is to be thinking creatively. And then this idea of being completely nimble and flexible and being able to adapt to changing circumstances in a very quick way. And I just, as I'm sitting here thinking about these 2 presentations, and then that presentation at the University of Pennsylvania, they didn't talk to each other, but it's a reflection of the kind of staff that we have in this district that continues to just be so impressive to me in the work that they put in, so.
Thank you, Dr. Lighty. We'll move on to item 4, budget and finance. Item 4.01, financing plan update, public financial management, PFM. Melissa.
Hi, good evening.
Thank you. We're going to start with a presentation and then an update from Melissa here this evening. And so I'll let Dr. Lighty lead us off with a couple slides, and then I'll take over while Melissa's passing out a handout. I will say, great update from curriculum, and tough to follow both of those acts, but we will try our very best. So Melissa, she's coming around the table, is one of our primary contacts with public financial management. PFM represents, and I don't want to get it wrong, Melissa, probably over 200 or 300 districts, I think, in the state.
About 250.
Okay, out of, so about half of the schools in the state use public financial management for a variety of advisory services, including issuing bonds and debt. And so they've been a partner to us through this process. And so as we come back to the board, though, just to frame the conversation, because there is the next borrowing, which ultimately is what Melissa's going to talk about, but just a reminder about the conversation around facilities upgrades in our financing plan. And so Dr. Lighty and I'll step through this here.
Yeah, so something maybe some of the board members have not heard, but those who've been with us for a while know the terminology MASD on the move, which really took on a life of its own back in 2015, 2016. It's hard to believe it's been that long ago, but it did. And then, as Greg said, we're also going to talk about the financing plan, an overview, and then the update. So when you think about MASD on the move, that was the tagline, if you will, that we gave to a process that we knew we had to go through back in 2015, and almost a decade's worth of work. And I think that's important for all of us to step back and think about. We had a feasibility study, and recommendations came out of that feasibility study, essentially and initially for the elementary program, right? And we really were looking at program and the equity in that program, obviously the growing enrollment in the district, and then looking at our buildings' mechanical and infrastructure needs. That was part of that too. I just real quick story to share with the board. I will never forget going around to the elementary buildings and talking about a plan that was going to take 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years. And one of the elementary buildings that we went to is on the north side of the district, called North Side Elementary. And I remember sharing with the PTO that night and a pretty large group of parents that you're going to be the last elementary done in this process. And them going, yeah, right. Like you're ever going to get to us. And one of the proudest moments for me personally was going, look at this beautiful building, and it's done. I also remember some consternation in this board about we're never going to get to the high school, right? And look where we are with that now. We're not done, but we're well on our way to the high school. So kudos to this board and the work that went into MASD on the move, nearly a decade's worth of work to get to the point that we are. And not only that, but following through with doing what we said we were going to. And maybe, even though we have another borrowing loan, a little bit of a celebration to say, guess what? It worked within the financial plan that we have established, thanks to the work of Greg Longwell and PFM and Dr. Van Drew and a lot of other people that have played into it. And actually, we're going to get this high school done inside of the amount that we said many, many years ago. That's pretty impressive. And so I wanted to kick it off before Melissa got in and gave you all the technical information, because even though we're borrowing money, we knew we were going to borrow this money, and we're in good shape, and that'll get us through the projects that we said we wanted to get through. So turn it over to you.
I'll just provide a couple things I'd like for the board to kind of watch for as we step through the handout. But the financing plan is kind of the umbrella plan, I'll say, that was the underpinning of all of our construction projects and provide financing for all of our construction projects. And so if we started the feasibility study all the way back in 2015, the recommendations grew out of that. and then we started to do our projects along the way, managing the pace of them. We also were issuing debt along the way, managing the pace of our borrowings. That was very intentional because we were matching our borrowings up to the projects that were occurring, but it also allowed us to do it in a timeline that allowed for building the budget the way we needed it to be, because we ultimately have a mortgage payment, right, that we've got to make. And so building that budget in that way. And so that incremental borrowing, that really is part of the financing plan, where this is the last borrowing of that series of incremental borrowings for the current financing plan. And so kudos, I think, as Dr. Leidy said, I look at it, and likewise, 8 or 9 or 10 years is a long time in the school world, right? You know, and so all the construction projects we were able to do and the financing along with it, just like we talked about earlier with Mr. Kastner and Dr. Van Drew, how other schools were curious about that relationship. They also often ask us about how we've managed all of the construction projects and financing, and we often tell them Melissa and Brad are a key part of that, and you know, they usually have their numbers. So the key components I do want to call out, and Melissa will step through it as we talk about the handout, but those incremental borrowings did require, as the board knows, some real estate tax increases along the way, and so every year we've been setting aside a portion, and so even this year we set aside 1% of our tax increase for the construction plan, which is kind of stepping in that budget amount for these borrowings. Use of cash reserves, and so this was probably more critical earlier on, because we still, when we started this in 2015-16, had some existing debt, or more significant amounts of existing debt on the books. And so we were bringing the existing debt alongside newly issued debt. We knew that we wanted to build the budget incrementally to get us to the point where everything's contained in the budget. We knew there was probably some one-time, I'll say, costs along the way that we were going to use the capital reserve fund to help phase in, if you will, these additional costs of borrowing. And so along the way, we've been looking at that as a backstop. And then ultimately, with this final borrowing, the 10 million, building the budget to the point where we can confidently say to the board, we know we have a couple more years of phasing in that 1%, but the budget is where it needs to be. It supports all the debt we've issued, the construction projects, and really kind of tying a bow tie on the current financing plan and the final borrowing that we want to look at here this evening. So, I introduced already Melissa. Mr. Remick is away this evening, but he also works alongside Melissa. So sometimes you'll see them both, sometimes you'll see one or the other. Just depends on their clients. They have a lot of evening meetings.
Well, I like to come to Mechanicsburg because this is my home district. I live here.
Yeah.
So I take every opportunity I can.
So we get maybe preferential treatment. It's
Would you like Melissa? Don't give Brad any credit.
And so with that said, the financing plan update, we've been looking at these packets. They probably look familiar for our more veteran board directors, but I'll let Melissa step through it and talk about the next borrowing.
So, thank you, Dr. Leidy and Mr. Allwell, for the introduction. It is great to be here. As I said, in the district where I live, I was listening very intently to the presentation. I have so many thoughts. Let's talk about the interest rate environment. So the first page of your handout, this is a chart of 3 snapshots of the same tax-exempt index. So you or I, when we go get a mortgage, we borrow on a taxable basis. So if you've been following the news lately, you'll hear mortgages are at 6, 7, 8%. Not so great for us on the personal side. But on the tax-exempt borrowing rates that the district can consider, you're between 4 and 4.5%, depending on the term. Probably a little bit on the lower end of the side of that where we sit today. And the top graph of this page, this gives you a sense of how rates have trended over the last 30 years. That red line is the 30-year historic average, and the blue line is the rate line as of last Friday, okay? So one thing to note on this is that starting after about year 5, the blue line is below the red line, meaning
we're still below, a little bit below historic averages, pretty close to that historic average on the long-term borrowing rates. On the short-term investment rates, you can get 5 to 5.5%. Brian will tell you about that. So the investment earnings that you're getting in your construction fund, because you borrow the money and you don't spend it all on day one, so those investment earnings, they're pretty efficient right now. You can actually invest at a higher rate than you're borrowing at. So, and it has not been that way over the life of the whole financing plan. Of the first borrowings we did in 17, 18, 19, you were essentially earning zero, functionally. But for the last couple of borrowings, investment earnings have been very meaningful, and that helps you do more projects, which is awesome. So just a little bit of orientation there around what the market that you might be considering borrowing at is like. Next page is a few bullet points. I'm going to talk through these bullet points as I go through the handouts, but these are written out so you have them for the future. Skipping ahead to page 4, this is the district's existing debt portfolio. The top half of the page is the gross debt service. That's the principal and interest you've promised your bond investors that you will pay. The bottom half of the page is net of local effort. So you actually get state reimbursement on columns 13 through 17, and then also column 19. Column 19 is all of the debt that is related to things before this financing plan, as we think about it. So that's all that's left, is column 19. Everything else is a result of the planning and execution between 2017 and the meeting where we're at tonight. Okay? So the important column here is column 22. This is the district's total local effort. So that's the maintenance that you need to have in your budget on a local basis. So you're at roughly $9 million. I'll point out that just like you or I could pay down early on our mortgage if we wanted to, or refinance and get a lower rate if the market made sense, the district has those opportunities too. But the bond market works a little bit differently. You promise your end investors that they get to keep their investments for a certain period of time. And that's called the call date. And the bottom line, at the bottom of the page, you can see the district has various call dates between 2022 and 2031, depending on which series of bonds there are. You actually have two. You have one that's past the call date, your 2017s, and then you have one coming up in 2025 next year. And so what that call date means is at that date or any time thereafter, if it makes economic sense, we'll come back and we'll say, hey, let's take the old higher rates and replace them with new lower rates. As it sits right now, those 2017 bonds, they're below what you can borrow at right now. So right now, it makes sense to do nothing for that issue. And we'll just continue to watch it. And at any point in the future, we can come back and refund some or all of it by itself or in conjunction with other future bond issues. Page number 5 is the summary of the plan. And for those who've been on the board for a while, this is so much simpler. Down to the last step. Column 5, that's your existing local effort before we started this plan. So that flips back to the prior page where I said, this is the only thing you have left.
Like
column
Dr. Vandroom's money. Everything else is yours, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Column 6 is all the new debt service that we've layered on. Okay. Column 8 is the proposed 2024 borrowing. So you can see we're using a little bit of what I'd call a modified wraparound structure. We're proposing to cap the financing at 20 years, and that's related to the useful life of what we're considering financing in this portion, shorter useful life stuff. Just like you wouldn't finance your car over 20 years, you match the financing term to what you're borrowing. And what the wraparound means is if you look out there in 2043 and 2044, you'll notice the payments are a little bit bigger. Okay? That's because we're filling in where some existing debt is falling off. And overall, our column 9, our local effort when we're done, is level or declining, which by state law is how we have to structure the debt, in aggregate, level or declining. You'll notice that this assumes that the district gets the money in mid-July. We'll look at a timeline on the next page. Column 10 is that phased-in millage that we've looked at several times, and as Greg noted, has 1% for 3 more years. The budget you're working on, and then 2 more. And then column 11 shows you the budgeted local effort that you would have in your budget as a result of doing those millage increases. So column 12, because there's a little bit of difference between what your actual payments are and how much you're going to have in your budgeted run rate, you're going to use a little bit of those cash reserves. And that's been the plan all along, to help mitigate the taxpayer impact, bring the debt online in a measured way. And you can see what that totals.
Melissa, that column 12 used to be a lot longer,
It
right?
did.
In terms of what we were
It
going to
did.
have to pay in cash. So what happened?
You guys did better on your budget. Yeah.
That's $856 or $1,000.
Dollars. So really,
So what that means is in that last year, you're as close as I can get you within decimal places to having what you need. And then you just run down.
said another way, if you look at column 10, as Melissa had shared there, we have the 24-25 upcoming budget, which has a 1% set aside, and then 2 more after that. And then you can see at the end of that three-year period of time that the budgeted local effort just about equals the total local effort required by the bonds. And so that, I think, is the celebration of we had, along the way, known we needed to increase the budget, phase in millage, kind of do it in a measured way so that we weren't taking too many big bites of the apple in any one year, and then getting the budget to the point where everything's level. So that's.
All right, so in 3 years, we won't have to raise taxes. Is that what you're saying?
For this current financing plan.
That extra 1%.
For this current financing plan.
Current financing plan.
So let's talk about procedure, because many of us have been through this before, and I know some folks are new. And that's what's on the next page. So the top of the page is a sample motion that the board could consider potentially at its meeting on May the 14th, authorizing the financing team to proceed. And the financing team is PFM as your independent financial advisor, your solicitor, and your bond counsel, who's stock and leader. They serve both roles, different people, but they serve both of those roles, to proceed with $10 million of financing. And you might be asking yourself, how did they come up with this $10 million amount? So the IRS gives certain benefits to investors who buy what's called bank qualified bonds. And that's to incentivize investors to lend to smaller issuers, which you guys are big for a Pennsylvania school district, but in the scheme of local governments, you're small. You're not, Los Angeles Unified School District. And in exchange for those tax benefits, investors pass along to you slightly lower interest rates and, most importantly, a shorter call feature. So you can refund your debt after 5 years instead of waiting 8 to 10 years. So where we can, we take advantage of that opportunity. And that's what this last and final step is designed to do. We would then, on June the 11th, hold a competitive internet auction where all of the registered broker-dealers, so those are banks who can sell municipal bonds, are invited to participate, and we take bids. It's like eBay for bonds. It's kind of fun. And then we'd come that evening for an approval. After that approval at the board level, there is a procedural approval at the Department of Community and Economic Development. It's a check the box kind of approval. And that process takes 20 days. So typically we allow 35 days between when we sell bonds and when the money comes into your accounts. And after that, you can start spending it on your projects. I'm happy to take any questions.
So professionally, the rates, what they are today, do you see them going up or down by maybe the election?
Yes.
I mean, are we borrowing too soon in June?
Our current feeling is no. We're not advising clients in general to try to make a rate-based decision, make a project-based decision, assuming, are you comfortable with where the rates are today? 4 to 4.5%, kind of at historic averages.
And
That-
non-volatile.
And-
Like that's
yeah.
that would be where I would be more concerned, right? Or we'd want more guidance on timing.
Yeah,
And
it's been pretty steady as she goes for the last couple months. And if we can actually flip back to the first page. I didn't talk about the bottom graph, but it really lends itself to kind of answering your question. So this is a graph of the day-to-day movement of the 10-year bond if you had a perfect credit rating. So this isn't like a rate quote. This is if you had a perfect credit rating, how rates have trended. And you can see over the course of 2023, rates went up. And then in December, over a roughly 6-week period, they went whoosh, and they've come up a little bit, but they've hovered very, very steady for the last 4 months. So it's been very, the term we use is rate bound, moving in a very tight range. And that's generally a good thing for predictability, and that leads to good auctions. We've had great auctions lately.
So can I just ask why we're borrowing this 10,000? What is it going to pay
10
for?
million.
Oh, 10 million.
That was the last part of the
I know.
money that we need
But can I
for.
just hear it verbally?
Yeah, so probably about half of it is going to finish the existing scope of the high school. There are some other things at the high school that need to be considered that was on the last meeting when we looked at the facility recommendations, those general areas. And then a combination of this money along with some money that we actually have in the district, some combination of that will begin to address a lot of the recommendations that the facilities committee came up with. And if you recall, that was the direction of the board about a little over a year ago, where the board said, okay, we know this is coming. How are we going to distribute the other projects that need to be out there? The good news is that when we originally planned for this borrowing, we assumed at the time that the majority of that money would have to go to the high school and maybe even another borrowing on top of that. We were keeping our fingers crossed, but we didn't know. And so, again, kudos to everybody involved in that process of maintaining those costs in an effective way, but also the vision of the board to say, we know we're never done with projects, so what else is out there? And that's what you looked at last month, 2 weeks ago, when we looked at the facilities recommendations. So we've not assigned numbers to that yet, but there is no question that there's well over $5 million worth of projects on that list, but that will have to come back individually to the board over the next period of time to look at each of those.
So you're saying we might have, 50% of the money left over for those additional
It's somewhere in there.
in the pools?
is included in that. What's not included in that, frankly, is the back of the building where the track is, but the board's been setting money aside for the track now for a couple of years. The other thing that's not included in that is some of the recommendations that were more detailed that came out of the facilities group that the board will have to make some decisions on. The timing of the high school, I think, is probably what's next on the list for you. We need to look at the middle school and what has to be done there. There's plenty of projects that are necessary projects, as was endorsed by this group.
So my next question would be, is like, when do you anticipate borrowing more money? Like, a year from now, 5 years from now? We don't know yet.
So I think our goal, first and foremost, is knowing that we created this plan to account for all of the current projects under our current financing plan. And as Dr. Leidy said, the fact that we look good, I think evidence of that could even be the change orders, right? So you look at the change order sheet, those are all under 5%, right? Which is a contributing factor. And so I think any money that's left over from this borrowing provides us the flexibility to then also look at the facilities planning conversations to say, we know there's projects, and this gives us better flexibility to say, what are we doing about the track? And because we have money in the capital reserve fund, but then when you take whatever's left over plus the money in the capital reserve fund, that allows us some of that flexibility to then say, the board coming back to those priorities of the facilities planning conversations we've been having, we feel like we can confidently move forward with some of those. I don't want to say we'll never borrow money again, obviously, but I do think that things like the track and, depending on to what extent we do things at the middle school, I think there's options there. This gives us options.
I think I'll maybe add a little differently too, is the benefit of the board endorsing the list last time was that now we can dig into some specific items on that list to determine what should be our next priorities. And as we tease out what are those next priorities, that'll give us a better picture of, okay, well, what are the chunks of money that are going to have to go to those different projects. So now that we have that full list available to us to begin to dig into, that'll give us that opportunity to bring a more specific project back to the board.
And that'll be. I know that over the last couple of years, we're trying to determine if we're at our maximum of borrowing capability. So, like, after we borrow this 10 million, what do you think?
Can I jump back one and then come back and answer that specific question, just to tie the loop? So whenever the district or any local government is considering issuing bonds, the IRS asks you to consider 3 tests, 3 reasonable expectations tests. The first is that within 3 years of settlement, so 3 years of the day that you get the money, you have reasonable expectations you can spend 85% of the money. So here you're saying, I have reasonable expectations that within the next 3 years, I'm going to spend 85% of 10 million. Second, within 6 months of settlement, you enter into a substantial binding obligation to spend 5%. You already have a contract with your architect and a project underway. You meet that criteria. And finally, you proceed with due diligence to do a project. You are underway on a project. So you meet those reasonable expectations criteria for this borrowing. And before we could begin to have any serious conversations about any additional debt, we'd have to meet those reasonable expectations on any future borrowing. So I don't know, because I don't know where you're at in the facilities planning process, but I think to kind of get at part of the crux of your question, that would be the test that we would be talking to you and your administration about.
Financing is far downstream. The project has to come into scope first.
Yeah.
And then
So,
discuss it.
yeah, to give you an example, Dr. Leidy talked at the beginning about how this financing plan began in 2015. We issued the first bonds in 2017. And to be frank with you, that's pretty fast for a school board to begin the planning process, make decisions, and then issue debt. Takes a couple years, typically.
So maybe interpret it a different way, a minimum 2 years, but hopefully longer.
Depends how much you want to spend.
Oh, I know
Well,
that.
let's, when
Yeah,
we
I
look at
know.
these projects, how much do we want to spend in the future is really the answer.
So let's go back and answer your specific question. So it's actually on page 3. So at the time of your 2023 borrowing, so this is a little stale, but this was as of the time of your 2023 borrowing, you had $176 million of capacity, and you had remaining capacity of about 26 million. So after this borrowing, after this one we're looking at, you would have 16. Your borrowing capacity grows 8 to 10 million a year. It grows at a pretty good clip.
And that's
As
because
you-
of paying down.
It's because you pay down a lot of principal and your revenues grow. So it's your numerator and denominator grow.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great question. Questions? Any other questions? Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Tell Brad you said hi.
Yes, tell me miss them.
Well,
Now they know.
he is having fun. He's in Mexico.
There you go. Very good. All right. And we'll move that forward for further discussion and vote at the May 14th meeting. And with that, meeting is adjourned.
Right.